I know I haven't said much about the current Lord of the Rings previews that have been coming out. I just really haven't had much time to work on it. But today, and a few days from now, we're going to work on some upgrades to the precons that they are selling for the Commander format. So first up, let's take a look at the Riders of Rohan. The Riders of Rohan is a blue-red-white deck that focuses on humans and the interactions that work well with them, and is led by Éowyn Shieldmaiden as the front-facing card, and has a secondary commander of Aragorn, King of Gondor. So let's take a look at Éowyn to start. It is a 5/4 human knight with first strike that at the beginning of combat on your turn, if another human entered the battlefield this turn, you create 2 red human knight creature tokens with trample and haste. Then, if you control 6 or more humans, draw a card. Aragorn, King of Gondor, is a 4/4 for 1 colorless, a blue, red, and white. Vigilance lifelink, and when it enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. And whenever it attacks, up to 1 target creature cannot block this turn. If you're the monarch, creatures can't block this turn. Both of these are quite powerful, but only one of them really focuses on what I want to do with this deck, and that is Éowyn Shieldmaiden, because she creates copies of human knights and then draws those cards off of humans entering the battlefield. So she's a humans matters commander. So let's lean hard into that, and let's take a look at what I would cut out of this deck, and then we'll take a look at what I would add back in to make this deck more powerful. Now, the ground rules of this is I cannot cut more than 10 cards. I don't want to completely rip this deck apart and remake it into just a generic commander deck. I want to leave as much of the Lord of the Rings flavor intact as I can. So let's take a look here. First up, I would cut out Dearly Departed. For 4 white, you get a 5/5 flying spirit. So that's not a human itself, but it has an ability, as long as it's in your graveyard, each human creature you control enters the battlefield with a counter, +1/+1 counter on it. The problem here is this deck is not designed to get things into the graveyard easily. You don't have a bunch of impulse draw here. You don't have like ways of sacrificing it and getting it into the graveyard to get that benefit. And it's very expensive just to slam it down for 6 and have it die in combat. It's very unreliable. So for that reason, I would cut this card. The next card that I would cut is Verge Rangers. For 2 and a white, you get a 3/3 human scout ranger with first strike. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. As long as an opponent controls more lands than you, you can play lands from the top of your library. I do not like cards like this because you are playing from behind if you actually get the full benefit. Otherwise, all you're getting is a 3/3 for 3 with first strike, and that is not very good in and of itself. So if you're having to sit here and rely on being behind the curve of your opponents to get the land part of this card, it's just not that good. In the same vein is Weathered Wayfarer. For a white, you get a human nomad cleric, a 1/1 that has pay a white and tap, search your library for a land, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Only activated if an opponent has more lands than you. Same deal. You have to be playing from behind to actually get the benefit of this card. Otherwise, it's just a 1/1 for 1, and it's not that good. So I'm not a big fan of this card, and for that reason, I would cut it as well. The next cut I would take from this deck is the Zealous Conscripts. For 4 and a red, you get a 3/3 human warrior with haste that when it enters the battlefield, gain control of target permanent until end of turn. Untap that permanent, it gains haste until end of turn. Zealous Conscripts is part of a very popular combo in EDH where you get a Kiki Jiki and you just make infinite copies of Zealous Conscripts, targeting itself to untap and just, or you untap Kiki Jiki and then you just make a bunch of conscripts with haste and you attack and kill. There's no Kiki Jiki here. There's no infinite combo available. And a 3/3 for 5 with haste that just threatens a single creature is not that impressive in and of itself. And so this one's getting chopped. The next card that I would give the axe is Denethor Stoneseer. For 1 and a blue, you get a 1/3 human noble that when it enters the battlefield, scry 2, and you can pay 3 and a red, tap and sack it. Target player becomes the monarch. Denethor deals 3 damage to any target. This is an expensive way just to get the monarch, and it's not all that great. Like in a pinch, you could combine it with Aragorn, King of Gondor to kind of do like an alpha strike, but that is about the biggest benefit. But they could see this coming because you have to tap him to actually do it. So you have to wait a turn cycle unless you have a way of giving it haste in order to activate it and do a thing. And that's, you cast it and you play it. That's 6 mana you've already burned to go ahead and just do this little effect. So it's not that great, and I'm not a fan of this card. Next up is Call for Aid. For 4 and a red, it's a sorcery where you gain control all of target opponent's creatures until end of turn. Untap those creatures, they gain haste until end of turn. You can't attack that player and you can't sacrifice those creatures this turn. This is a very, very limited insurrection ability. I don't like the limitation that I cannot attack the player I stole the creatures from. I do not like the limitation that I can only target one player's creatures. So it's got some limitations here that I'm not a fan of. So for that reason, I'm going to give this one the boot as well. Gimli, I am so sorry, but you are not making the cut in my variation of this deck. Gimli of the Glittering Caves for 2 and a red. It's a 1/1 dwarf warrior with double strike that whenever another legendary creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Gimli. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. While these are very powerful effects and it's quite a good card, it's not what we want to be doing if we're trying to make the human's creature type matter. It's not a human. It doesn't affect humans in any way, shape, or form. It's just kind of thrown in here to be a card that fits the color scheme of the deck, and I'm not going to keep it. Now, the next card does work well with the human sub-theme. It's Prince Imrahil the Fair for a white and a blue. You get a 2/2 human noble that whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 1/1 human soldier token. And that's great and all, but the problem is there's not a ton of card draw in this deck, even at default if you just pick up the precon, to get this to consistently make tokens for you. So with that said, unless I have a way to really just be drawing a card every single turn, or at least every turn that I take, there's really no reason to run this. It's a 2/2 for 2, and it's color locked. You can't pay colorless or anything in there, so it's harder to cast. And it's just not that impressive if you can't generate these extra human tokens every single turn. The last 2 cards that I would chop are a couple of artifacts. The first up is Heirloom Blade. For 3 colors, you get an artifact equipment. The equipped creature gets +3/+1, and whenever the creature dies, you may reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card that shares a type with it. Put that card into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in random order, and it equips for 1. I am not a huge fan of cards that pull, especially in like these kind of decks, that pull chunks of cards off the top of your deck until you hit something in particular. The reason for that is sometimes you need to get a specific card. Like say you just need some kind of board wipe, or you actually need card draw or something to kind of stabilize your board. Well, if a creature dies because you had to block because you're struggling against somebody else, and you flip it over, well, it goes to the bottom of your deck. You're going to lose that card that you needed just for some random human creature in this particular deck. And for that reason, I'm not going to use this card. And the last card I would chop is Thought Vessel. 2 colorless artifact. You have no max hand size, tap, add a colorless. This is just a very generic mana rock. It doesn't help us cast any colors, and maximum hand size really does not matter all that much because you're not drawing tons and tons of cards with this deck. So for that reason, this thing's gone. Now I've gone through what I would chop and cut out of this deck. So what would I add back in? Well, let's start with some cards actually from the new set that I would add back in as replacements. The first card that I would add back in from the new set is Boromir, Warden of the Tower. For 2 and a white, you get a 3/3 human soldier with vigilance that says whenever an opponent casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell, and sacrifice Boromir, Warden of the Tower. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. The ring tempts you. So he's got a protection spell built onto his body, so you can sacrifice it to protect your other humans if somebody tries to board wipe, or say you want to build in a board wipe of your own. So you basically sack him, wipe the board, your stuff will live, and then you just counter swing into everybody and kill them. The other big thing here is that static ability of whenever an opponent casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter the spell. This scuttles so many things in Commander. So things like Fires of Invention, nope. Cascades, nope. Those things they're just completely neutered. Any kind of the living ends and things like that, the suspend spells, you can't use those if this guy's on the board because when you go to cast the spell, you're not actually casting it using mana, so that counter spell will be countered. This just has a lot of interesting interactions with the board and just has that that protection just tacked on. Another good add-on here is Boromir's brother, Faramir, Field Commander. For 3 and a white, you get a 3/3 human soldier. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature died under your control this turn, draw a card. Well, we're going to be sending our creatures into the red zone a lot here, so there's going to be things dying, so that's a good way to get cards. And whenever the ring tempts you, if you chose a creature other than Faramir Field Commander as your ring bearer, create a 1/1 human soldier token. So you're going to have ways of, if you get, tempted by the ring, to create more humans for the deck, as well as drawing cards when they die in combat. So this is just a great card to add into this deck. The last of the new cards that I would throw in this deck is Éomer, Marshal of Rohan. For 2 red, you get a 4/4 human knight with haste that says whenever one or more attacking legendary creatures you control die, untap all creatures you control. After this phase, there is an additional combat phase. This triggers only once each turn. So this is a great way to, swing into somebody. And if they are, desperate to stop, damage, and they try to block out one of your bigger legendary creatures, such as Éowyn Shield Maiden or Éomer himself, you're going to end up getting an additional attack phase here and be able to just come in and just plow into your opponents. On top of that, this deck does include Combat Celebrant, so it gives it an additional way to get those extra attack phases in there. Moving on to traditional Magic the Gathering cards, we have the first edition I would put here, Wedding Announcement. For 2 and a white, you get an enchantment that at the beginning of your end step, put an invitation counter on Wedding Announcement. If you attacked with 2 or more creatures this turn, draw a card. Otherwise, create a 1/1 white human creature token. And then if it has 3 or more counters on it, transform it, and the backside gives +1/+1 to all of your creatures. So this has a lot of utility for us. First off, it can draw us cards if we need them in a pinch. It creates more human tokens for us. And then as it flips over, all of our little piddly humans get pumped up and become bigger threats. It is just a great all-around card for this deck. A card I've tried to make work in the past, and it wasn't all that great, but I think it would work pretty well here, is Cemetery Protector. For 2 white, you get a 3/4 human soldier with flash that when it enters the battlefield, exile a card from a graveyard. So you get a little bit of graveyard hate built into this that you can do at instant speed if need be. And then it says whenever you play a land or cast a spell that it shared the type of the card that was exiled, create a 1/1 human creature token, which that is the big draw here. It's a human itself, but it also creates other humans for us. So like the best thing you can do is exile a creature from a graveyard, play more and more humans, and then every human that you play from there on out would then give, or every creature you play would give us more and more humans to work with. In an effort to, keep our humans from getting swept up by red-based damage spells, we have Tajik Legion's Edge. For 1 red, you get a 3/2 human soldier with haste and mentor. That means when it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature that's lesser power, so it can pump up some of our 1/1s and make them a little better. Prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to other creatures you control. That's the part that's important here. So no blasphemous acts or no, those kind of board sweeps killing our stuff. And then for a red and a white, it gains first strike until end of turn. So all in all, this is just a great human to throw in here and keep our board alive and do good interactions with the mentor for us. And since some of our human tokens are just little 1/1s and whatnot, let's make them a little more threatening with Blade Historian. For 4 hybrid red-white mana, you get a 2/3 human cleric that has attacking creatures you control have double strike. So this is going to make our stuff much more threatening in the end here, and it's just a good way to finish off our opponents. Another way to make some of our stuff a little more resilient is Luminarch Aspirant. For 1 and a white, you get a human cleric 1/1. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So you can throw counters around on things like Éowyn and on top of Aragorn and things like that, where you're going to be able to make them bigger and survive in combat more and more, and just make them into bigger threats, or you can make the littler stuff bigger. There's a lot of applications to just putting counters all over the place. Another popular human that works really well here is Adeline Resplendent Cathar. For 1 and 2 white, you get a star 4 human knight with vigilance where its power is equal to the number of creatures you control. And whenever you attack for each opponent, create a 1/1 white human creature token that's tapped and attacking that player or a planeswalker they control. So you get to get a bunch of human tokens off of this. She's a human herself, and it's just a great all-around threat. And I just love this card, and I'm going to include it in my version of the build. And the last card that I would recommend, even though it's a little more expensive than a lot of the other ones, is Anointed Procession. For 3 and a white, it's an enchantment that says if an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many of those tokens instead. So the thing here is, Eowyn builds up all of these tokens for us, gives us all these things. Well, if you have Anointed Procession out, instead of getting 2/2/2 Human Knights, you're going to get 4 of them, and they're just going to come slamming in with Eowyn, and that means all you need is 1 more creature, and then you get the draw card trigger on top of that. With just Eowyn and the 1 creature coming into play, you'll have your 6 humans with just minimal effort. So those are my upgrades for the Riders of Rohan deck and what I would cut out of the deck to actually make it work. What do you guys think? Some people like to keep these decks intact and just play them as precons. I like to lightly upgrade my precons and make them a little more consistent. Now, I did not talk about lands. I did not talk about those things. That is actually the biggest thing you can do to upgrade any precon to make it more consistent and more powerful, is actually to fix the mana bases, because they don't give you a lot of great cards for the mana bases. It's mostly just tap lands and things like that. So my recommendation overall, though, is if you want to fix any precon, go ahead, get your shock lands, get your pain lands, get any kind of duels that you think would work best in that deck, or even triomes themselves, put them in the deck if that matches, and go to town. With that said, I hope you enjoyed this little upgrade video, and I'll catch you in the next video.